Hey, it's Dr. Karin Luise, and I want to get a little bit personal in today's video and share some of my personal story with you. I want to talk about some of the painful experiences that I've been through and how they taught me and transformed me, and I hope they resonate with you and offer some insight that helps you to be inspired to live a bigger life. Let's begin. So I'm going to get a little bit personal today on a topic that I don't talk that much about, and that's my personal divorce story. You see, I was once married to a Hall of Fame baseball player, which got a lot of press back in the day. I choose not to mention him by name. If you want to find out, you can Google it. But what I want to do is impress upon you how this relationship, this divorce, this marriage, and all the things that I went through really transformed me and helped me on my soul evolutionary journey, because it brought me to a place where I was spiritually activated in a level that I never before dreamed possible. Because see, I believe that each relationship that we have is an assignment. It's a soul contract. No matter how famous you are, how much money you have or don't have, or however long it lasts or doesn't, that person is there in your life on a soul level to help you grow. And the decisions and choices that you make, especially if you go through tumultuous times and a divorce, the decisions that you make are there as choices in front of you to make a choice of going this way or that way in each step of the way. And I'm hoping that by telling you why and how I made certain choices that I made, you'll be inspired to go a certain direction in your own journey. So in 1992, when I was a really young girl, I married someone that ended up becoming a professional baseball player. He was in the minor leagues at the time. He ended up rising to fame, becoming a very, very famous ball player, and eventually landing in the Hall of Fame. So I was there for the minor leagues, I was there for the World Series, I was there for a lot of really cool stuff. So in the beginning, the relationship was really magically aligned. We fell in love, we were young, we were both pretty much babies, and we fell in love in a way that was really in a soul alignment. I'm very aware that we had a soul contract, that we had a soulmate contract, because the alignment was so quick and so magical. I felt like I'd known him forever, and he the same, and we were engaged in 6 months, married a year later, and life took off in the fast lane. So after a year or two in the minor leagues, he ended up making the big leagues, and we ended up having this enormous life change. And I was very, very young when it happened, but boy, was it super exciting. He was with the Atlanta Braves at the time. I'm from Atlanta. So it was really, really cool to be a part of the team that went from worst to first. We went through the World Series. Before that, we had the strike, and we went through, he had an injury and all of this stuff. And so we were kind of tumbling around in this early life together because we were really trying to grow. We were trying to make our relationship work. And in it, we had all of these factors coming at us that had to do with a really large amount of fame really quickly. Eventually, the money came in. And because of that, a lot of stressors started coming in. So I'm not going to complain and say, oh, I went through so much. I was in that phase for a really long time. I did go through a lot. A lot of it was very public. Thankfully, the internet was not a thing back then, so you're not going to find a ton of it on the internet, but you will find stories and reflections based on some things that he and I have both put out there. But, you know, back at that time, it was going into a big life. It was very, it was life-changing. It was something growing up middle class in Tucker, Georgia, that I never saw coming, and it was a wonderful experience. I got to be around so many different cool people that I never before would have met. I've since then expressed to him gratitude for the experiences that I had. I got to go through this life-changing event that really informed later what I'm doing, because now I have a really big understanding of what it's like to have a lot of money, a lot of fame, and how it's not like I was literally living behind the velvet rope, and it's not what people think. It's not as, even though there is glamour involved, I think people have a really hard time feeling sorry for or having compassion for people that live a life that seems luxurious and seems full of fame. And what people don't realize is that there's a big cost to that. There is a lot of stress that you otherwise wouldn't have had. There's a lot of confusion in your relationships because you never really know why people are in your life. You lose a sense of authenticity because people are really attracted to the fame. So what ended up happening was we had this wonderful life, right? Like a lot of fun games, a lot of fun traveling. I got to travel in ways I'd never traveled before. And, you know, there were so many cool experiences, but in it, I started having this increasing feeling of isolation. Because what happens is the gap between me and all my other friends that were in their early 20s became really, really wide, because I was catapulted with him into this life that looked totally different from anybody else that I knew. Now, I still have besties that were there, and I still cultivated great friendships, but there was this separation point that ended up making me feel really really misunderstood, because people assumed that because I was in a life and he was there of glitz and glamour and everything seemed to be handed to us, that we didn't have any problems, right? That I didn't have a reason to complain, or that they couldn't really even relate to me. So over time, I ended up feeling more and more isolated. And the bigger the houses got, the more isolated I felt. I can say in full 100% truth that the most isolated and saddest I've ever been was when I lived in a 12,000 square foot mansion in Alpharetta, Georgia. Even though it was a beautiful house, I ended up being left alone there when the divorce happened, when he left me. And I felt so isolated and alone. And part of the process that made me feel even more depressed is that people looking in assumed, because I was in this big house in a country club, that my life had to be perfect. Like there wasn't room for compassion there. But what was really happening is I was sitting in this cavernous place of depression, considering suicide, doing so much inner work because I felt so lost and alone because I didn't feel like anybody could understand me. So during that time of breakup, it's very well publicized. There was a lot of infidelity. There were a lot of affairs on his part. There were multiple pregnancies, and all of this information ended up coming crashing down on me. I had signs along the way, but I kept doubting my intuition, right? I kept doubting it. And he kept convincing me that it was, people were telling me lies. People were trying to break us up. And again, there were no cell phones back then. Pagers were just coming out. This was the early 90s. And so there wasn't really a way to track down things. And so I was left very insecure and unsure. And I just went through a decade where I was just unstable. Like I didn't know who to turn to. I was getting clues that things weren't working out. But what was happening was I was really trying to grow spiritually, and he was going in a totally different direction. Now, he's written a book about his life. You can find out more in that book. He's actually very honest about it. So I'm not telling you anything that's breaching any contract, because he has actually come forward and talked about it. The infidelity was widely publicized, but it left us struggling with this really strong negative emotion between us. And he was just not in a place anymore where he wanted to be in a committed relationship. I really wanted the commitment, but our alignment started going way, way off. So as I've talked about in other videos, our soul contract was coming to an end because we no longer were in soul agreement. So when you go through that and your soul agreement, your soul resonance, your alignment goes off, it ends up being very, very uncomfortable, because you're actually entering a home and a marriage at very different vibrational states. And if one party's way over here and one party's way over here, when you cross paths, there's a lot of friction because your souls no longer resonate at the same frequency. So now I understand it. Back then, 20 years ago, I knew I was going through something painful, and it felt so uncomfortable and traumatizing and all those things. At the time, I didn't realize that's what's going on, but now as my spiritual journey has continued, I can look back on that and reconcile it and know, wow, like that's what it feels like to go out of alignment with somebody, and I grew so much in the process. So as the divorce started to proceed, and it wasn't even my choice, I was so lost in lack of self-love because I was raised in a home where my stepdad was very narcissistic, overpowering my mom. He actually was very unfaithful, and I picked a partner who resonated at that same level because I really thought energetically, subconsciously, that I deserved to have this. So I played it out again. Okay, so here we have generational patterns. So I was playing out again an abusive and a very unfaithful relationship with this person. And so as time went on and we ended up getting divorced, it was a very, very difficult process. So any of you going through divorce, I have so much compassion for you if you're in litigation, because to be honest, that litigation period for me was the hardest part of all of it, because you have somebody coming at you and telling you that it's your fault. And we went through about a year of that. It was pretty debilitating. And so now when I counsel clients that are going through that, I use kid gloves, because what it does is it re-traumatizes all the wounds that you really want to heal. And so it kept me in limbo. Eventually, the divorce was final about 2000, and I had to reconcile. He had a new baby on the way. He got married like a few weeks later. It was so disorienting that I had to recreate my identity. Like I lost this world that I had built. I had created the Braves Family Foundation. I had a TV show in Atlanta. Like I had all this stuff wrapped in that identity, and I was taxed with, I lost all of it. All the friends, all the invitations, all the VIP status at all the clubs and the restaurants, all the free cars. It was a lot, like gone. And I was literally left in a puddle of depression on the floor. And I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I'm just saying it was much worse than anybody knew. So I was so isolated that I decided to start going to therapy. So, and this is why I'm a therapist now. I pulled out all the self-help books that I can. Iyanla Van Sant, her book, I forget the name of it, but it was instrumental. So all these books, Deepak Chopra's books, the books on Wayne Dyer's books, like they just kind of fell off the shelf, and I started going through my awakening process. I started doing more self-actualization exercises. I started learning more about my spiritual path and waking up. And in that process, I was going through psychoanalysis once a week for 2 hours a week. I did that for 2 years. So I was in deep introspection. And I went through a dark night of the soul. So often when we're waking up, and this is just one step of many steps in my journey in the past 20 years, you can go through what is considered a very deep deconstruction. And that's what I went through. I had to reform my entire identity. And so what I ended up deciding to do is volunteer. That was my first step. I went to the Ronald McDonald House in Atlanta, and I decided to stop feeling sorry for myself. My spirit said, go be around people that actually have it pretty bad, and let's like recalibrate you. So I started hanging out with the families at the Ronald McDonald House, with the kids, and I started to get more of my self-esteem back, more of a resonance that wasn't so based in victim mindset. And then eventually during therapy, my therapist one day said to me, hey, have you ever considered being a counselor? So I was a teacher. I taught elementary and middle school before this. She said, you're helping everybody in your life. You're volunteering. Why don't you become a therapist? It had never occurred to me. So eventually I went and took the GRE, which was a whole year of training and taking it and applying to a program. And I eventually went and got my master's and my PhD, and that was a choice. So I want to talk you through some of the choices that I was presented with, because I have a guess that if you're watching this, you're interested, but you may also be facing choices in your own life, maybe through a divorce or separation or breakup, where you are kind of looking at choices of what to do moving forward. So one of the things that happened as we were moving forward was I was approached by magazines, publications to tell my story. Many TV stations, now podcasts, I do get asked about it. But I was approached in a way where I could have made a lot of money writing this full story, because it was very, very salacious and in the media. And it was like, people really wanted to know it. And I had to sit back and do a really deep soul searching on what my intention was. And this is one of the big shifts I had in my own pathway to higher consciousness. And my mom actually helped me a lot with this. She's a pastor, and we sat down together, and I was like, do I tell the full story? Because I had literally details that would take down Major League Baseball. I had details that would tear apart the Braves organization. I mean, it was deep, and it was wide, and it was not really pretty. I'm holding all of this information, and it's like, well, I could go and make a few $1 million or whatever it was at the time. I could tear down Major League Baseball with information that I have, or I could rise higher. And I chose to rise higher, because what I started to look at was the why. And what I started to realize is and this is before I even knew about karma and intention and spiritual energy, but again, this is part of my path. My mom, through talking with me, she talked to me, and I decided that if I am sitting in an energy of revenge, if my intention is revenge, I'm going to be reopening and recreating a loop of energy that then is going to be activating that again in him or in people, because there are a lot of haters out there for baseball wives. I'm going to be reactivating that in people. So I decided that I did not want to receive that back, because I wanted to rise higher. I wanted to create an identity where I wasn't called his ex-wife, but where I was called Karin. I actually eventually pulled my middle name up to my last name, and I depleted any man's name from my name. I wanted to be Karin Luise. I wanted to be this person here with you. I wanted to be the spiritual guide that I was born to be. So I made the decision, because I knew that if I activated the timeline, of course I didn't know that then, but as I'm looking back, I'm using my current language. I knew that if I activated that choice of revenge on him and told the full story, that would become my identity. I would always be the girl, the woman, the ex-wife that tore down Major League Baseball and his career. And while I would have probably had some fame and fortune because of it, I didn't want that kind of fame and fortune. I even get asked now to tell the full story, and I've never done it, because I'm like, you know what? That is for karma and God and the universe to figure out. That is no longer up to me. I'm not in charge of what happens along that timeline for those people involved. I'm going to let it go. And yes, it means letting go of a lot of opportunities, but instead I chose to rise above it and cling to the opportunities, or lean into the opportunities that represented light, that represented spiritual growth, that represented helping people heal, that represented me evolve evolving to a higher plane, even though I couldn't see the ending at the time and I still don't know the ending. That is where my soul was calling me to go. So as time has gone on, I've reinvented many times. There's actually a lot more to my story, but I'm sticking with this one for now. I've reinvented many times, and each time along the way, as someone's disappointed me, or I've had another breakup, or by the way, I had another divorce, I've had to look at how am I going to handle this? How am I going to let go of the low vibrational energy of seeking revenge, guilting somebody, shaming somebody, because those are the lowest vibrational points of consciousness. How am I going to raise myself up to a place where I am exuding love for the planet, where I'm helping people shift spiritually, where I'm helping to draw them up and out and rise above their pain and their trauma. And by the way, I'm here healing generational wounds for my mom, grandmother, great-grandmother that all agreed to being disempowered, however that looked in their lives. And I'm very aware of it now. And if you're watching this and connecting to it, you may also be here to heal ancestral wounds. You know, whatever your experience it is, we all have our own unique life experience. And if that lights you up or gives you chill bumps, you're here to alchemize those wounds, not only for your life, but for everyone that came before you. And you can do the work. You can do the work with me. I have retreats and events where I work on this kind of a thing. You can find a shaman, a healer, a counselor, a spiritual guide to work on those wounds yourself so that you cannot live a life identified by that old trauma, but that rises to another level of higher frequency love for yourself, love for your past, love for your ex, and especially love for yourself as source flows through you and is always directing you to a choice of higher frequency so you can have a life that is activated on a higher level. I hope this helped you to make some choices in your life. I hope this made you and I connect on a deeper level, because I'm here to really help you on your spiritual journey and to activate you on a level that brings you to a place where you can have a life that you dream of. I have an in-person live retreat that I'm offering in May of 2023. It's going to be at a luxury beach location, and we're going to be working on your soul's evolution in a setting that is going to be beautiful, activating, and healing. So if you want to know more about that Wild Wonder Retreat, where you can gather with me and other like-minded souls so you can evolve more on your journey, click the link below to get all the details. I can't wait to see you there.